The knock came just as the rain found its rhythm. It wasn't frantic, not yet, just a hesitant stuttering against the old wooden door of the small apartment over the corner bakery, the kind of knock you hear and think, that's a person trying not to be heard. Ayan wiped flour from his hands, glanced toward the tiny tent of blankets where his 8-year-old daughter Hania had fallen asleep over a jigsaw puzzle, and stepped quietly to the door. When he opened it, a woman tipped forward like a toppled candle, her weight falling into his chest, her breath hot with panic, her fingers desperately clutching his shirt as if fabric could be a lifeline. "Help me," she whispered, the plea more breath than sound, the kind of word that opens the floor beneath your life. Right then, before Ayan knew her name or her history or why the shadows seemed to be hunting just over her shoulder, something in him, something father-shaped and scar-healed, decided. Whoever she was, whatever this was, no one would hurt her here. Ayan balanced the woman's weight carefully, almost as if he were shifting a sleeping child from car seat to bed, that practiced tenderness that comes from years of lifting Hania after long days. "It's okay," he said, not because it was okay but because the body sometimes believes what the voice repeats. The woman's hair was wet, sticking to her cheeks. Her coat smelled like rain and the sharp tin of city grit. When he guided her inside, she blinked as if the little apartment were a lighthouse, and for a moment it was. Light from the kitchen bulb pooled onto worn linoleum, warm air from the oven curled outward smelling of cardamom and baked milk bread, and quiet wrapped everything, the kind of quiet that says, "We're still alive." Hania stirred in her blanket fort, rubbing one eye. "Baba," she murmured. The woman flinched at the sound, the fear inside her startled and wild. Ayan lifted a hand, a soft, steadying gesture. "It's all right, princess. Bad rain. Just helping someone get dry." Hania nodded, trusting that tone the way children trust the drift of a familiar lullaby, and lay down again. He guided the woman to a chair, poured water, and slid a clean towel across the table. She took it with shaking hands, jaw clenched so hard it made the muscles flutter along her neck. "I'm Ayan," he said. "You're safe here." She looked at him as if safety were a word she could almost remember. "Noor," she managed. "I'm Noor." There were no obvious injuries, no blood, but her sleeves pushed back showed angry red marks around one wrist, the kind you try to hide with bracelets and practice. Ayan's chest tightened. He had seen marks like that before, on his sister years ago, on strangers in the hospital corridors back when he worked nights as an attendant, on the women who came into the bakery with their smiles set too carefully. He set tea to boil. Noor's gaze flicked toward the window, to the sheen of rain-glossed street. "Below. They might come," she whispered. "I left, and I took. I took something they want." "What did you take?" Ayan asked gently, keeping his voice low enough not to wake Hania, steady enough not to fan Noor's panic. Noor's hands moved instinctively to her coat pocket, pressing flat as if to keep something from leaping out. "Proof," she said, the word trembling and fierce all at once. "Proof of what Cameron has done. Contracts. Accounts. Names." She swallowed. "He thinks I'll keep quiet. I did, for too long. But tonight. I couldn't anymore." The apartment seemed to inhale with her confession, the kettle whistled, as if to punctuate the silence that followed. Ayan poured the tea and slid the cup toward her, thinking. He had heard of Cameron, the posters, the social media gloss, the charity galas with perfect photographs. People like that didn't leave smudges where others could see. If Noor had proof, she had done something braver than most people realized bravery could be. She had said no in a city that often rewarded the people who never heard it. He checked the hallway, double-locked the door, pulled the curtain. The bakery below would be quiet until dawn. It was an old building, upstairs, every step announced itself. If someone came, he would hear them before they reached the top. Still, he felt the thinness of his walls, the smallness of his life wrapped against a storm bigger than any single family. He took a breath. "Listen," he said, returning to the table. I won't ask you to tell me more than you want to. But if there's a chance someone will come after you, we should make sure they find a closed door and not a frightened silence. Noor's eyes were glassy, but when she lifted them there was a pilot light burning there. I don't want to run anymore, she said, voice rough with exhaustion and some stubborn, unfamiliar hope. I don't know where to stand. Here, Ayan said. For tonight, stand here. They worked in quiet after that. He gave her a sweatshirt of his to replace the wet coat. She went to the washroom and washed her face like a ritual, letting the water reset something back to zero. When she returned, she looked younger, not in years but in possibility. Hania sat up again, wide-eyed, and Noor offered a small smile, the kind that feels like two open hands. Hi, she said softly. I'm Noor. Hania blinked, then scrambled out of the blanket fort with the seriousness of 8-year-old diplomacy. She picked up a chipped teacup from the low shelf, the one Ayan kept for hot chocolate, and filled it with a little water, handing it to Noor as if hospitality were a crown you could share. Baba says tea helps scary things dissolve, she said. Like sugar. Noor's laugh was a tiny bell in the storm. Then maybe I'll need 2 cups, she whispered, and Hania nodded solemnly as if authorizing it. After Hania fell back asleep, this time clutching a bread roll like a teddy bear. Ayan and Noor spread papers across the kitchen table. Noor had tucked the documents into a thick envelope hidden inside her coat's lining, photocopies of ledgers, emails printed and dated, a spreadsheet she had drawn by hand because she no longer trusted anything that required a password Cameron could reset. The numbers told a straight story: funds diverted from a woman's shelter his company sponsored, bills for construction never completed, names shuffled like cards until the deck could only deal one outcome: profit for him, quiet for everyone else. At the bottom of one page, Noor had written in pencil, if I have to be afraid, let it at least be for a reason. Ayan stared at that line longer than made sense. How long? He asked. How long have you been carrying this? Years, she said. I kept thinking he'd change. That my silence was patience, not surrender. But every time I left a bruise of his out of the photo frame, every time I told myself I was overreacting, he won. She lifted her chin then, a small tilt that made her look suddenly unbreakable. I won't let him anymore. They made a plan. Ayan had seen too many people go to the police without protection only to find their fear laughed into an advisory, come back with more. He knew a journalist, a woman named Rima who bought almond croissants every Thursday and once covered the bakery's Ramadan night shift story. He also knew a pro bono lawyer named Usman who came in sometimes with his mother on Saturday mornings, who seemed like the kind of man who kept promises even when no one was watching. The clock slid past midnight. The rain softened and then stopped, leaving the city hushed and listening. Noor nodded through each step, eyes bright but set. He'll come looking in the morning, she warned. He always knows where I've been. Ayan felt the smallness of the apartment again and the vastness inside him that didn't care. Then we'll give him an address he can't bully, he said. A newsroom. A lawyer's office. A community that looks back. Close to dawn, Hania woke for real. She crawled into Ayan's lap and then, with a child's perfect sense of proximity, into Noor's. It should have felt strange, but it didn't. There is a way children recognize sorrow and choose to sit beside it, making their small bodies into bridges. Noor's eyes filled, not with fear this time but with the kind of relief that hurts. Thank you, she whispered, not to anyone in particular and to everyone. The bakery opened at 6. Ayan sliced the first loaves, sugar dusting the air like morning glitter. Noor helped his assistant in the back, tying her hair, folding pastry boxes with quiet concentration, moving like someone who needed to keep her hands busy so her thoughts didn't pick locks they shouldn't. When Rima arrived, she took one look at Noor's face and Ayan's and understood the outline before hearing the script. She listened without interrupting, the pen still in her hand not moving for a long time because sometimes you have to read a person before You write their story. We'll do this carefully, she said when Noor finished. You won't be alone in it. Usman came by at 9, still in yesterday's suit, eyes ringed with the stamina of a man who believes the law should be a house anyone can live in. He scanned the documents, asked a few precise questions, and then made several rapid calls: a women's shelter with secure rooms, a judge he trusted who might expedite an emergency order, a colleague who had experience with financial crimes dressed up as charity. By noon, it felt like a net had been thrown not over Noor but under her. She stood somewhere. She stood here. At noon, Cameron's men came by the bakery, two well-dressed storms pretending to be drizzle. They peered through the glass, asked harmless questions, knocked on the side door. Ayan looked them in the eye, calm and unmoved, the way you look at a stray dog testing a boundary. He neither invited nor antagonized. He simply became a wall. We're sold out, he said evenly. Maybe try tomorrow. They left with the oily certainty of people unused to hearing the word no spoken in a tone that didn't also apologize. That afternoon, Noor moved her few things, 2 dresses, a binder, the envelope of copies still warm from the copier, into a room at the shelter. Hania drew a picture of the 3 of them standing under a giant umbrella. It's us, she explained. But the umbrella is everyone who is helping. Noor taped it to the wall. For the first time in too long, she slept with both eyes closed. The next days stretched and tightened like dough, proving quiet, then sudden movement, then waiting again. Rima worked on the story, confirming details, gathering comment, making sure the truth had armor. Usman filed motions and requests, building a legal frame around Noor's courage. Ayan held the pieces in his hands by continuing to do what he did, baking, listening, turning fear into something you can put on a plate and share. The city kept moving. Buses and school bells and everything ordinary, and inside that motion, Noor's life began to shape itself around something that wasn't him. On the 4th day, Cameron called Noor from a number that didn't show. His voice was velvet on stone. Come home, he said. You don't know what you're doing. Noor heard the old gravity in it, the familiar orbit her heart used to mistake for love. She closed her eyes. She pictured Hania's drawing. She pictured Ayan's steady hands placing bread on a tray like a prayer. She pictured herself in a room with a locked door where she had the key. I know exactly what I'm doing, she said, and ended the call. That night, Ayan and Noor sat on the bakery's back steps after closing. The air smelled of warm sugar and city dust cooling. Do you ever get scared? Noor asked, watching the window of the shelter across the street where Hania waved a paper mask in greeting. Ayan laughed, not lightly but honestly. All the time, he said. Since the day Hania arrived, scared as my shadow. But I learned something from it. He glanced sideways. Fear isn't a stop sign. It's a sign you're near something worth protecting. Noor looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. I think I'm finally close, then. The hearing came fast because Usman made it so. The law is a tool, he told Noor, not a miracle. But in the right hands, even a tool can feel like grace. In the cramped courtroom, Noor sat straight-backed, a small figure against a machine that had never seemed built for people like her. She testified with a voice that shook only on the first answer, then settled into a cadence like walking, one step, then the next, naming dates and sums and places where the numbers didn't add up. She did not mention the nights she pretended a bruise was just poor sleep, or the mornings she changed her shirt because it hurt less. She didn't need to. The documents did that arithmetic. Cameron arrived late, silver watch flashing like a siren, smile already curated. He sat with his lawyers, arranged his face into concern. For years he had been a story other people told about success. Today, Noor was telling a different one. When the judge granted Noor a protective order pending full investigation and froze access to one of Cameron's prize accounts to preserve potential evidence, there was a humming in the room that felt like an old, stuck window finally opening. Cameron's jaw tightened at the edges. He did not look at Noor. He looked at Ayaan, as if measuring him, then away, like a man who has spotted a door he had thought locked and doesn't know who left it open. The article published the next morning. Rima didn't sensationalize, she did something harder. She made Noor's story an intersection of others, women from the shelter whose grant money dried up midwinter, a contractor who never got paid for a playground he built twice, a volunteer who questioned the numbers and was quietly pushed out. She wrote Noor as a person, not a plot twist. The photo was simple, Noor at the bakery counter, sleeves rolled, flour on her forearms. She looked ready. By noon the piece had been shared thousands of times. By evening, 2 city council members had called for an inquiry. The umbrella in Hania's drawing expanded. In the days that followed, the threats shifted. The late-night calls stopped, replaced by rumors. Noor was a liar, they whispered. Noor wanted attention. Noor was angry because Cameron had left her. Noor was unstable, had always been. Lies are heavy, but they're only strong if no one speaks against them. This time, people did. The shelter's director wrote a statement, "When a woman brings us truth, we don't measure it by how comfortable it makes us." The contractor posted his invoices. A staffer from Cameron's office, anonymous, careful, emailed Rima confirmation of a slush fund nicknamed the Moon Pocket. Each voice made the next one easier. Noor read the comments and felt frightened by the attention, then steadier, as if the ground had decided not to tilt. At the bakery, customers started leaving notes with their coffee money. For the shelter. For Noor's legal fund. For the umbrella. Ayaan taped every note to the wall by the register, a mosaic of handwriting that looked like a neighborhood learning its own signature. Hania counted coins with grave importance, the way children perform civic duty. In the afternoons, Noor learned to decorate cakes, piping blue swirls that made Ayaan laugh because they looked like oceans on small planets. She wasn't hiding, she was building. One evening, just before close, Cameron arrived alone. He stood in the doorway, took in the notes on the wall, the flour-dusted floor, the quiet hum of a shop that smelled like comfort, and looked suddenly smaller. "You've made a spectacle," he said to Noor, voice low and contemptuous. "You could have left cleanly. You could have had a life." Noor placed the piping bag down, met his eyes without flinching. "I am having a life," she said. "For the first time." He glanced at Ayaan. "Do you understand who you're up against?" he asked, like a man bewildered the world wasn't collapsing at his accusation. Ayaan wiped his hands and stepped closer, not unkind, simply certain. "I'm a father," he said. "I'm up against bullies every day, fear, exhaustion, the math of school fees and rent, the ache of doing it alone. Men who use their size to make others smaller are just a variation. You're not new." Cameron's mouth twitched. For a second, he looked almost human, tired, frustrated, cornered by a story that no longer obeyed his edits. Then his eyes sharpened. "You think this ends with a newspaper and a judge," he sneered. "You think people like you win?" Noor smiled, thin and luminous. "We already did," she said quietly, hands slipping into Hania's as the girl stepped from behind the counter with the perfect, fearless timing of children. "You don't get to walk through our door anymore." He left, anger trailing him like a coat too heavy to shrug off. The bell over the door chimed with a bright, ordinary finality. Ayaan exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was keeping on standby. Noor looked at him then, the adrenaline ebbing, and something like gratitude and awe moved through the space between them. Not romance exactly, not yet, something more patient, more deliberate. A promise that could be kept. The inquiry gathered speed. It turned out Cameron's empire was less palace and more tent, impressive cloth, weak ropes. As officials tugged at the lines, corners folded. Financial auditors found patterns like fingerprints. People who had once accepted his charity now asked where it had been taken from. There were cameras and headlines and all of it made Noor crave quiet places, but the difference was she could now choose quiet rather than be banished to it. Whenever it was too loud, she went to the back steps of the bakery. Ayaan would join her, handing over a still warm bun and didn't say that there were people who wanted to help but didn't know how to be first. He just stood there with her until her breath learned to be steady again. The guard took her statement, then Omar's, and the arrival of 2 officers put a neat frame around the scene. It would hold for tonight. He knew some frames splinter later. When they reached the street, Noor's breath ghosted the window where her forehead pressed, eyes round and unblinking. Omar lifted his hand and waved with all the ordinary easiness he could muster. He opened the car door, the warm little world inside returning to him like a thank you. Noor's cheeks were wet. She had been brave and quiet and as still as a small moon. "Are you okay?" Omar asked, because it mattered. She launched into him, arms around his neck, small fingers finding the back of his jacket like climbing rungs. "Baba," she whispered. "I was so scared." "I was scared too," he said, truth like a handrail. He looked over her shoulder at the woman, who stood on the sidewalk hugging her own elbows. The officers had finished. She glanced at him, gratitude raw as a scraped knee. She lifted her hand, unsure. He nodded. "Do you want me to walk you to your car?" he asked when Noor was buckled again. He kept the door open so Noor could see them. "We'll stay together." The woman nodded. Close up, he could see the pale line of an old scar just under her chin, the kind of story you don't tell on purpose. "My name is Alina," she said. "I don't know how to." "Hi, Alina," he said. "I'm Omar. This is Noor. You don't have to say anything." He meant it. They walked slowly, their footsteps 3 beats in an evening that had forgotten its tune, and when Alina got into her car and locked the doors, she exhaled like a person who had been underwater too long. She looked at him through the window, hand pressed to the glass in a thank you bigger than language. Back at home, after Noor had fallen asleep mid-story with her hand still holding his finger, Omar stood by the window and let the apartment be warm around him. He thought of Alina's face when help arrived. He thought too of the people who had hurried away, and of the teenagers, one running, one filming, both choosing a kind of involvement. He wondered if courage, like yawning, can be contagious. He hoped so. He poured himself tea he wouldn't finish, then sat at the kitchen table and wrote in a small notebook he kept for the days that felt like hinge points. Tonight, he wrote, don't walk past the sound of someone else's life. Be the noise that stops the hurt. The city woke up pretending nothing had happened, because that is how cities get things done. But stories ripple, even when their first splash is swallowed by traffic and emails and missed buses. Alina texted the number the officer had pressed into her hand. A support line, a counselor, a suggestion of a safety class the precinct held in the community center on Tuesdays. She stared at the words for a long time, this invitation to step from being a moment's victim into being the narrator of what came next. She also texted a number the guard had scribbled for her, on a receipt pulled from his pocket. Omar's. She didn't plan it as anything more than a thank you. She had been careful with friendships since moving to this city after the kind of breakup that makes you doubt your choosing. But gratitude wants to be shared. She wrote, it's Alina. From the garage. Thank you for stopping. He was at the sink washing an impossible sticky residue from Noor's lunchbox when the phone buzzed. He read her message and felt the strange relief of knowing the story hadn't ended at the parking garage. He replied, I'm glad you're safe. If you ever feel shaky and need a voice on the line while you walk to your car, text me. He added a smiley he would never put in a work email and sent it before he could overthink it. The following Tuesday, the community center smelled like lemon cleaner and hope stretched thin over folding chairs. The officer who led the session was the kind of woman who didn't need to yell to be heard. She taught them how sound travels in a garage, how to stand so your balance belongs to you, where the panic buttons hid in plain sight. She also talked about the bystander effect, how the human brain tries to outsource responsibility when it sees a crowd, waiting for someone else to be the proof that action is needed. Someone else is always everyone else until one person decides it's them, she said. Her words found places in Alina and nested there. Omar sat in the back with Noor, who colored a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands in front of a boxy car. Her drawing had a huge sun in the corner, even though the evening outside was stubborn and gray. Alina noticed the way Omar listened, not with the hungry eagerness of someone who wanted to learn to dominate, but with the quiet attention of someone arranging tools on a shelf, in case. When the session ended, people drifted like damp leaves after rain, in no hurry to return to their individual nights. Alina approached Omar, who was tying Noor's shoelaces tighter so they wouldn't trip her. "Hi," she said, more confident than she'd expected. Courage, it turned out, also liked company. "Hi," he said, smiling the kind of smile you trust because it looks like a person made it themselves. Noor looked up and said, very seriously, "I drew you," and presented the picture. Alina laughed softly at the sun that took up half the sky. "It's beautiful," she said, because sometimes beauty is just proof that someone saw you and bothered to make it into color. They walked out together to the parking lot. It wasn't the same as the garage, but they both felt it anyway. Alina breathed easier when the fresh air met her face, and she felt a ridiculous urge to cry again, not from fear, but from the relief of not being in that fear alone. "Can I tell you something?" she asked as they reached her car. Underneath, in smaller writing, Noor had added, "For anyone who needs to say, help me." Then someone would push the door, it would swing inward, just as the scene faded, on the hinge of a promise that had learned how to hold.